be pleased with what Paul's doing now, John.
I'm pleased that everybody's doing well, you know. I'm more pleased that Ringo's doing well, you know, that he's got himself a good niche.
The Beatle who hated the Beatles' own music. That's right. John Lennon, the man who helped create the most successful band in history.
You know, the music got to your body, and the Beatles just carried it a bit further, made it a little more white.
Spent years secretly obsessing over other artists while publicly dismissing his own work.
So much younger than today. Never needed anybody's help in any way.
Tonight, we're exposing the shocking truth about Lennon's musical obsessions and the bands that drove him to creative madness. You think you know John Lennon? Think again. Behind closed doors, he was consumed by jealousy, constantly comparing the Beatles to his secret musical heroes. These weren't just influences, they were full-blown obsessions that created explosive tensions within the Fab Four. Paul McCartney had no idea that John was secretly trying to recreate the sounds of artists he considered superior to their own band. The music industry has kept these secrets buried for decades, but today we're revealing the 6 bands that John Lennon worshipped above all others. From the girl group that made him question his own masculinity, to the country duo that taught him everything about harmony, these artists shaped the most famous musician in the world in ways that will shock you. Get ready for betrayals, secret meetings, and the musical influences that literally tore the Beatles apart. This is the untold story of John Lennon's ultimate playlist, 6. The Ronette number 6 will blow your mind, the Ronettes. That's right. While John Lennon was busy being hailed as a rock god, he was secretly obsessing over 3 girls from Spanish Harlem who could outsing and outcool the Beatles any day of the week.
For every kiss you give me, I'll give you 3.
Ronnie Spector's voice haunted Lennon's dreams. Industry insiders reveal that John would play Be My Baby on repeat for hours, studying every vocal inflection, every breath, every scream. He allegedly told a close friend that Ronnie Spectre had more raw talent in her little finger than most male rock stars had in their entire bodies. But here's where it gets dark. Phil Spector's wall of sound production became Lennon's dangerous obsession. The same Phil Spector who would later hijack the Beatles' final album and drive a wedge between John and Paul. Coincidence? Absolutely not. Lennon's fascination with the Ronettes led him straight into Spector's manipulative grasp. The real shocker? Lennon reportedly said he wished the Beatles could sound like a girl group because female vocals had an emotional honesty that male rock bands couldn't touch. This revelation sent shockwaves through the band's inner circle and created the first cracks in their brotherhood. Paul McCartney was reportedly furious when he discovered John's secret Ronettes obsession, calling it a betrayal of everything they'd built together. The Ronettes didn't just influence Lennon's music, they planted the seeds of destruction that would eventually tear apart the greatest band in history. The damage was already spreading through their creative partnership like poison. 5. Little Richard number 5 is the wild man who taught John Lennon how to scream, Little Richard.
She rock to the east, she rock to the west, but she's the gal that I love best.
But this isn't just another influence story. This is about obsession, jealousy, and a secret rivalry that consumed Lennon for decades. Picture this, teenage John Lennon standing in front of his bedroom mirror, screaming until his voice cracked, desperately trying to match Little Richard's otherworldly vocal power. He would practice Tutti Frutti until his throat bled, convinced that if he could just scream like Richard, he'd unlock the secrets of rock and roll. The shocking truth? Lennon never got over his failure to outscream Little Richard.
Do the Lennon sisters admit to
Shut up.
Anybody?
Yes, the Beatles, see, I gave the Beatles their start in
Industry sources claim that even during the Beatles' peak, John would privately rage about Richard's superior vocal abilities. He allegedly told intimates that Little Richard made him feel like a fraud, like he was just playing dress-up in the rock and roll game. Here's the bombshell. When Lennon finally met Little Richard in 1962, he was reportedly left speechless and humiliated. Richard's charisma and raw energy made John feel small and insignificant. Witnesses describe Lennon as visibly shaken after their encounter, realizing he could never possess that level of natural showmanship. This insecurity poisoned Lennon's confidence for years. Every time he stepped on stage, he was haunted by Little Richard's ghost, knowing he was a pale imitation of the real thing. The man who millions worshipped as a rock god secretly felt like a pretender who could never measure up to his screaming idol from Georgia. 4. Bob Dylan. Number 4 is the folk prophet who destroyed the Beatles from within, Bob Dylan.
May your heart always be joyful. May your song.
This isn't just about musical influence, this is about betrayal, manipulation, and how one man's friendship became the poison that killed the world's greatest band. August 1964 changed everything. When Dylan introduced the Beatles to marijuana in that infamous New York hotel room, he wasn't just sharing drugs, he was planting the seeds of destruction. Industry insiders reveal that Dylan deliberately targeted John Lennon, recognizing him as the weak link who could be turned against his own bandmates.
So great that you wouldn't even have the capacity to speak.
The psychological warfare began immediately. Dylan convinced Lennon that the Beatles were sellouts, commercial puppets dancing for screaming teenage girls. He allegedly whispered poison in John's ear, telling him that real artists didn't write love songs. They wrote about revolution, pain, and social change. Paul McCartney saw through Dylan's manipulation from day one. Sources close to the band claim Paul desperately tried to warn John, but it was too late. Lennon was already intoxicated by Dylan's intellectual superiority and folk credibility. The bromance became an obsession that consumed John's identity. Here's the devastating truth. Dylan reportedly bragged to friends that he could control Lennon like a puppet. He knew exactly which buttons to push to make John question everything about the Beatles' music and success. By 1965, the damage was irreversible. Lennon had become Dylan's disciple, writing increasingly pretentious lyrics while dismissing the pop sensibilities that made the Beatles legendary. Dylan didn't just influence John Lennon, he systematically destroyed his loyalty to the band that made him famous. 3. Elvis Presley. Number 3 is the king himself, Elvis Presley. But this love story turned into the most bitter hatred in rock history.
Dressed in black. Well, they've been so long on the street.
And the psychological damage it caused John Lennon was catastrophic. Teenage John Lennon worshipped Elvis like a religious figure. He memorized every hip swivel, every sneer, every rebellious gesture. Industry sources reveal that Lennon practiced Elvis moves for hours in secret.
A little more white even than Elvis did, because we were English, you know. People couldn't hear it, that's why they didn't understand it.
Convinced that mastering the king's magnetism would make him unstoppable. But here's where the obsession turned toxic. When Lennon finally met Elvis in 1965, the encounter was a complete disaster. The king was bloated, drugged, and completely removed from the revolutionary figure John had idolized. Witnesses describe Lennon as visibly horrified, watching his childhood hero mumble incoherently about his latest Hollywood garbage. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone realized. Lennon reportedly left that meeting feeling like his entire musical foundation was built on lies. Elvis had sold out everything that made rock and roll dangerous and authentic. This disillusionment poisoned Lennon's relationship with fame itself. He became obsessed with avoiding Elvis's fate, terrified that success would turn him into another bloated, pathetic caricature. The paranoia consumed him, making him suspicious of every commercial decision the Beatles made. The cruel irony? By rejecting everything commercial and mainstream, Lennon was still letting Elvis control his choices. The dead king continued haunting John's decisions years after their devastating encounter, proving that some childhood heroes are too powerful to ever truly escape. 2. Chuck Berry. Number 2 is the guitar genius who taught John Lennon everything about songwriting, Chuck Berry. But this mentor-student relationship was built on theft, lies, and a humiliating encounter that left Lennon questioning his entire musical identity.
Time I see you, you got something else to do.
Chuck Berry didn't just influence the Beatles, he created their blueprint. Come Together, Roll Over Beethoven, even Here Comes the Sun. Industry experts can trace direct melodic DNA back to Berry's compositions. Lennon wasn't inspired by Chuck Berry, he was stealing from him, note by note, riff by riff. The shocking truth? Lennon knew he was a fraud. Sources close to the band reveal that John would spend sleepless nights analyzing Berry's songwriting techniques, desperately trying to reverse engineer the master's genius. He allegedly told intimates that Berry had cracked the code of rock and roll in a way that made everyone else look like amateurs. But here's the devastating moment that shattered Lennon's confidence forever. When the Beatles finally met Chuck Berry in 1964, the guitar legend barely acknowledged John's existence. Berry reportedly looked right through Lennon, treating him like another teenage fan instead of a fellow musician. The humiliation was complete when Berry allegedly told someone within earshot that the Beatles were just pretty boys playing watered-down versions of real rock and roll. Witnesses describe Lennon as crushed, realizing that his hero saw him as nothing more than a successful copycat. This rejection haunted Lennon for years. Every time he wrote a new song, he heard Chuck Berry's voice in his head calling him a fraud. The man who created rock and roll had dismissed John Lennon as irrelevant, and that wound never healed. 1. The Everly Brothers. Number 1 will destroy everything you thought you knew about John Lennon. The Everly Brothers. Not Elvis, not Dylan, not Chuck Berry. Two country boys from Kentucky became Lennon's ultimate musical obsession, and the shocking reasons why will change how you hear every Beatles song forever. Don and Phil Everly didn't just influence the Beatles' harmonies, they created the entire template. Industry insiders reveal that Lennon spent countless hours dissecting every Everly Brothers recording, mapping their vocal arrangements like a scientist studying DNA. He allegedly told close friends that the Everlys had achieved perfect musical telepathy, something the Beatles could never match. Here's the bombshell that the music industry buried for decades. Lennon was secretly jealous of Paul McCartney's natural harmony abilities, because Paul could effortlessly recreate what the Everly Brothers did instinctively. John had to work twice as hard to achieve what came naturally to both Paul and the Everlys. The psychological damage was devastating. Lennon reportedly became obsessed with proving he could sing harmony as well as his bandmate, leading to brutal recording sessions where he would demand take after take, trying to match the Everly Brothers' effortless perfection. The ultimate irony? While millions worshipped the Beatles' harmonies, Lennon knew they were pale imitations of the Everly Brothers' genius. Every time fans praised their vocal arrangements, John felt like a fraud who had stolen from masters they didn't even know existed. The Everly Brothers represented everything Lennon wished he could be: naturally gifted, authentically connected, and musically telepathic. They were the impossible standard that drove him to creative madness and ultimately contributed to his lifelong feelings of musical inadequacy. So there you have it, the musical obsessions that shaped a legend and destroyed his confidence. Which of these shocking revelations surprised you most? Smash that like button if you learned something new, drop a comment with your favorite Lennon influence, and subscribe for more explosive music history secrets.